Welcome to episode 2 of Inhale, Exhale, Elevate. Today I have the wonderful Kalon Baird, the co-founder and chief technology officer for Green Rush Alliances, and his own brand, Splash Nano. Welcome to Inhale, Exhale, Elevate podcast. I am Autumn Shelton. This is a podcast hosted from our Santa Barbara Coast family cannabis farm to help keep your feet on the ground and your head in the sky. Autumn Brands and our female founders have a message that goes beyond just flowers. Learn about how our two families created a booming cannabis company that is leading the industry towards cleaner and more sustainable cannabis production. We aspire to move beyond strictly cannabis to help plant medicine lose the stoner stigma as we talk about all things holistic health. Welcome, Kalon.
Hey, thanks, Autumn, for having me.
Thanks for being here. Why don't we just dive right in? So I know how passionate you are about plant science and going above and beyond to formulate incredible consumer products. How did you get into this space?
That's a good question. I started out in the cultivation side of the industry many years ago. And when I was making different products using plant essential oils to heal various family members and friends, I kind of realized I had a knack for actually building products. And so that kind of was my launch pad into the manufacturing side of things.
Awesome. So what kind of innovation drives you and your business partner, Diana?
Well, we originally knew that, the whole edible issue of faster onset really needed to be changed and be more in line with, the way that pharmaceutical drugs are made and the way that, people consume alcohol, expecting a faster onset. So we really started pioneering nano emulsions as a delivery system for cannabis. And then after we kind of got a really good grasp on that, we started focusing more on the plant and the actual compounds that we were making faster acting, aside from just THC.
And when you started, I remember you actually were going to start with a different type of business plan, right? It was going to be a different type of manufacturing.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely in the very beginning, when this whole thing was unfolding, we were just trying to figure out where the opportunity was, what we're good at, and really like what trends we were trying to intersect in the future. And so, drinks and the drinkable category was the most interesting to me, and that's why I started pursuing, nano emulsions.
Awesome. Do you remember how we met many years
Well,
ago?
it's a little fuzzy. I think there might have been some, drinks and joints involved, but mostly an event downtown. I believe I met you and Abe when
Yeah.
we were, talking about the industry, and then, we started intersecting with each other at a bunch of different social events and industry stuff, and it's been nothing but a pleasure ever since.
I agree. It's been a lot of fun. I remember, I think we'd been growing for a number of years and you had just dived in and yeah, you and Diana were looking at what kind of business model you're going to run. And then I believe the licensing changed and then the whole market changed and everything. So it's been a pleasure to kind of grow in this with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, well, personally, you had a baby this year, didn't you?
I did. I
How's
did.
that? How's
Onyx.
that? Onyx. And how's that going? Transitioning from working nonstop to now juggling being a dad as well.
Well, there's not enough hours in the day, as you know, you have two, and you both are entrepreneurs, so I think
Yeah.
you can resonate with that. It's the days are long, the years are short, and it just feels like it gives me a little bit more meaning and a little bit more purpose about what I choose to spend my time on. And so, in a way, it's actually just been a blessing. And I have a wonderful partner, Serena, who's taking care of a lot of the family stuff and kind of getting us through this transition period.
Yeah, I have an almost 7-year-old and an almost 3-year-old, and juggling it all is definitely a challenge. Even this morning, I was trying to get out the door with the kids and running around, and I was trying to get them into the car to go to school, and Lennox disappears on me. And I'm like, where are you? And I'm yelling and I'm searching all around the house. And then sure enough, he had gone out one door and I'd gone in the other. And that's how I missed him. And he was actually in the car waiting for me like he should be. But I
Like a
got
good
so
boy. Yeah,
disappointed.
of course.
My mom got all worked up because I got to get to work, kids are definitely um, wonderful and challenging at the same time. So it's fun
It's from you guys. I'm taking notes.
to. I got lots of notes and lots of toys for you.
I'll teach you terpenes. You teach me about kids. Let's trade.
I like it. Perfect. Okay, so what kind of products do you make and how do you design and formulate them?
Yeah, so since we're an infused only manufacturer, we don't really ever touch the biomass. We only worked with pre-extracted cannabis oils of various different grades. We turn that into everything from suppositories to tea bags. I mean, end to end. We've done chocolates, we've done gummies, we do infused sugar, we do little drink additives, which are kind of our flagship. We make bulk emulsions that other people co-pack into their drinks and beverages. So really like anything you can think of in the infused product space.
What's your favorite one to develop?
Oh, developing probably the topical that the Autumn Balm's magnesium salve is my favorite. And I'm not biased at all because I'm here. It really helps like the most people. And when you kind of gave me free reign to really go to town on whatever I thought would be the best formulation, it was kind of a shot in the dark because we tried a lot of different things and it really worked out the best. So it's actually one of the most fun because so like every single person I talk to tells me how much it helps them and that just makes my day. So that's like what I'm really ultimately here for.
Well, that makes my day because that is definitely my passion project. I love our salve. I spent a year before even connecting with you with another manufacturer that it just never made sense. And we went back and forth. And then finally, you and I connected, and you had these incredible ideas, and that we were able to really put it all together. And how it came out was just a dream come true. So I am so
It's
grateful.
amazing.
And yeah, is an amazing product, and everybody just it works. That's all you
It
need.
works. It
That's
just
one we need.
works.
It just
It
works.
just works.
And the best part too is that, a lot of those topicals out there have that menthol kind of feel where you get that kind of false sensation. And that wasn't something that we wanted to do. We wanted something more refreshing, something that really, balances with the natural aroma of cannabis itself. Because a lot of them, sometimes you just get either hit with that cannabis or you get hit with the menthol. And so the product really came out really nicely with the aromatherapy that we did put
I
into
agree.
oils.
I agree.
So you touched on nanotechnology. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and why it's so important in the cannabis industry and in the future?
Yeah, so there's a few reasons why I think nanotechnology is applicable to what we're doing. I mean, we're essentially delivering a psychoactive compound orally to people, and you have a lot of kind of complex mechanisms in the body that make it so that something that's oil based can be transported to the cells, right? In the gut lumen and bypassing the liver and all of those things that are necessary for really drug development. Um, Nanotechnology seeks to solve a lot of those problems, and it's used very widely and ubiquitously by the pharmaceutical industry for a reason. Cannabis falls into a very similar class of drugs in the biopharmaceutical class system that have really, poor solubility, right? And so it's really difficult to get them into cells and to bypass the liver to not create other molecules and other conjugates like 11-hydroxy THC that everyone talks about, and I think Joe Rogan might have made famous. Um, but nanotechnology also helps cannabis oil, which is a fat, be more water soluble, right? It's not actually truly water soluble, but we attach molecules to the oil that stick out into the water as well and act as a bridge so that they can be suspended in a drink formulation. And since beverages are such a popular form factor for consumers to imbibe, we see that, through the lens of nanotechnology, we can industrially make that application viable and consistent and most importantly accurate. One of the big upgrades I think legalization really gave us was safety, for like pesticides and some of the other harsh solvents that are used to extract cannabis sometimes, but also just the lab testing and the potency and how accurate we can be. We've taken, a big leap from the old, brownie days where someone gave you a bad brownie and you curled up in a ball and called the cops on yourself to where we're having microdose beverages and tinctures and drinks that are formulated to perfection. So nanotech kind of gives us this way of homogenizing cannabis oils in water-based formulations so that they're thoroughly dissolved in the batch. So every sip of water you take or every corner of a gummy that you ingest is going to have the exact same medication in it
And it
as you
works
would expect.
faster, right? I mean, normally kind of a lot of these edibles can
Yeah,
take
it's
quite a while to kick in, but the nanotechnology kicks in a lot
Yeah, so
faster.
we actually just completed a clinical trial, a preclinical trial in Israel using rats, and we basically gave them a version of our nanotech that we use in our Splash Nano vials, and we measured how fast it would absorb into the bloodstream versus just cannabis oil dissolved in MCT oil, which is kind of the golden standard for tinctures of like, the past. And we did notice like a multiple in terms of how fast the product absorbed and also how much the product absorbed. So we got over twice the absorption of MC2 oil, so you're getting more in the bloodstream. We call that bioavailability. How much of the drug can actually be accessed by the bloodstream before being eliminated by the body. So speed and intensity of the actual number of nanograms per mil in the bloodstream were, achieved by using a nanotech formulation. And all of them are going to have a very similar performance, all the different formulas out there, but they differ from one to another based on, how small the particle size is, what's the electrical surface charge, and what are the other components in the formulation. Are they food grade? Are they not? X, Y, and Z.
Interesting. Well, I'd love to talk more about that too going forward. But let's talk a little bit more about the Autumn Brands topical that we just discussed, but maybe also the elixirs. So, how did you kind of decide? I know for us, for the elixirs, they're typically called a tincture, right? But we didn't want any type of alcohol, any type of additives, and you were great to really work with us to just make sure that it was just as clean as possible.
Right. Well, I think when you're talking about tinctures or elixirs, the most important thing is always going to be the cannabis going in, right? I mean, we know that the MCT oil is clean. We know that the carriers are clean, but it's the cannabis is why we're here, right? It's the thing that's doing the
Right.
work. And so since Autumn Brands has a no spray farm, it's really impossible to have pesticides in the source oil. And it's really important that you were also on board with choosing a very full spectrum, almost rosin-like grade of oil that really has all of the stuff that the plant made in it. And we're going to get into that in a minute. But that source of the biomass has to be contiguous all the way through extraction and then into infusion if you want the best products. And so many folks are, using distillate, they're using highly refined cannabis extract that has a lot of the minor components removed. That doesn't make the best product in my opinion.
I agree. No, I mean, you really turned us on to an incredible manufacturer that's also in Santa Barbara County. So everything we do is in Santa Barbara County, which is pretty special. Can you tell us a little bit more about that manufacturing process that he utilizes?
Yeah, so they use two different processes depending on the strain and depending on other attributes. So they're currently working on ice water hash, which is a rosin process that uses just water, and then they also have a process that's proprietary from Italy that's used in the perfume industry that is able to very delicately extract many of these compounds that like perfume compounds are very volatile, right? Even more volatile than cannabis extract.
Hmm.
And so they're really able to capture a very cold and a very gentle process that's actually a non-volatile process. So they're not using butane, they're not using propane, they're not using any of these really aggressive solvents. And that really works for strains that wouldn't have a really high yield using ice water hash because that's a big concern when going solventless is not every strain and trichome structure and how it's handled is really dictates how many grams you get out of a solventless batch. So we use both. He uses both, but it just really depends on which strain is provided.
Cool. Yeah, I know we've used a couple different ones, higher CBD one for our topical and for one of our elixirs, and then a higher THC one as well. So, both have turned out pretty incredible. So we're really grateful. Let's dive. So I'd like to dive into terpenes and kind of make this an introduction to launching a Terp Tuesday that we can continue on diving deeper and deeper into terpenes, and because we've just barely touched the surface. So today, let's just touch the surface a little bit and share with our listeners and help them understand a little bit more. So, what are
Right.
terpenes?
That's a great question. We hear a lot about it. Terpenes, I think, are the molecule, aside from the alphabet soup of cannabinoids, you hear the most about from a bud tender or from, a flower brand, and they're really important. They are aromatic molecules. They're technically fatty, right? So they don't dissolve in water. I think that's important to distinguish. Um, they are found in a lot of other plants, right? So, like, think of lavender, think of rosemary, think of mango, think of hops. Many of these terpenes are actually present in a lot of different botanical plants, and they're also in cannabis. I think cannabis has probably more terpenes that it can produce than any number of plants combined. I mean, there's hundreds of
Really?
terpenes that are present naturally in cannabis.
Well, why are terpenes so important?
So, also a good question. I mean, if you look at the evolutionary perspective of these plants, they've developed terpenes most likely to repel insects or attract pollinators or to defend themselves against, their environment for survival. And they have a really broad spectrum binding ability to the receptors in our body. What that means is just like if you eat something spicy, right? It's going to signal a response to tell your brain that something's hot. Well, terpenes kind of can also bind to a variety of different receptors in our body. They're called G-coupled proteins, and they're almost in every single cell. And so when you consume cannabis with these terpenes, they're having biological activity, right? They're binding to different cells and they're complementing the endocannabinoid system. They're allowing the alphabet soup of cannabinoids that you take to modulate and to have a different effect. So THC alone is really a monodimensional, CB1 activation. When you have a lot of this broad spectrum profile of different terpenes, you're having a completely more two or three dimensional experience. Does
So
that
you
does that
mentioned
make
you
sense?
mentioned it does make sense. You were going a little maybe higher level than some may understand. So why don't we take a little step back? You mentioned the endocannabinoid system. Why don't you touch on that a little bit more so that we can understand what a CB1 receptor means?
Sure. Sure. So we all have this endocannabinoid system. It wasn't made up by the cannabis industry. It's been studied for a long time. It's primarily composed of two types of receptors, CB1 and CB2. And our body actually makes cannabinoids. They're called endocannabinoids, meaning from the body, right? And that is going to be very similar. They're very similar in structure to THC and CBD, which are exogenous cannabinoids, meaning that they're made by plants. They're made outside the body, and so they mimic our body's own endocannabinoids. They're not the same, but they're very close, and they can bind to that same receptor system, just like our body creates our own opiates, right? Like we have an opiate receptor system, and our body creates molecules to reduce pain in our bodies. We can supplement that by taking, pills or injections or whatever we need to if we're in severe pain. We can do the same thing with cannabinoids. And so that's really important is how bioidentical they are to products that are made by our own body to solve things like neuromodulation, immune system, happiness, dopamine, all these other things that these endocannabinoids do. Everyone has a different system and everyone makes different levels of them, and there's enzymes in our body that can actually destroy them faster than we can make them. So that's why some people really benefit from the supplementation of cannabinoids from plants.
And that's why it truly is a medicinal plant,
Yeah, and,
right?
and, and, and it's pretty soft core when you really think about it compared to pharmaceutical, drugs where you're really working with a system that is in homeostasis in your body. And if you're deficient, you need to take more of them. It's not going to, knock you out like an Ambien will, right? Even though it can promote sleep, it's working these cannabinoids are working synergistically with your body's own system.
I feel like they almost balance you. If you're not making enough and you do consume cannabis, you get to this point of a balanced state because you're not producing yourself.
Right. And so I just wanted to take like a quarter step back and just name those endocannabinoids. So the ones that we make in our body are called 2-AG, right? Which is 2-arachidinoyl glycerol. And then we also have another one called AEA, which is also known as anandamide. And anandamide actually derives from the Sanskrit word meaning bliss. And so we have actually known about this for a very long time. And consequently, it happens to be the molecule that mimics THC.
And isn't THC directly binds with our system correctly, whereas CBD doesn't? Am I
CBD does so. CBD mostly binds. It binds well to the CB2 receptor, which is
okay?
located on a lot of immune cells and nerve cells, and there's still ongoing research about the endocannabinoid system because it's more complex than I think we initially thought. But CBD also binds to what they call the allosteric site on a CB1 receptor, which is where THC predominantly binds to, and it can actually affect the ability of THC to dock. So think of it like it binds to the backside of the receptor, which changes the protein structure, which then will allow a different amount of THC to bind to that site. So that's that negative, it's called negative allosteric modulation.
So is that a case where if you have too much THC and you get more CBD, it'll counteract the THC a
I
bit? Is
think that's the layman explanation of it. I think it's more complicated than that, but
yeah.
for all intents and purposes, that's what we think.
I feel like I've heard that in hospitals, if someone came in too high or something, they've used that kind of, I don't know.
I mean, I'd like to study this more. I mean, these are just some of the ways that pharmaceutical scientists are trying to get their grasp on, the pharmacokinetics of these compounds.
And you mentioned where the receptors are at are they different parts of our body, right? Or they oversee different parts of our body, right? Which,
Well, they're very ubiquitous. I mean, you see a wide distribution of CB2 receptors, like I said, on the immune system, on the nerve system, which is why CBD particularly helps for people that are having inflammation, where the immune system becomes activated, as well as seizures, neuromodulation on the nervous system,
hmm
and you're going to see them all over the place. But those are kind of the main concentrations I think that you can find these receptors.
great. Um, how do terpenes affect your cannabis choices?
Well, I mean that's a loaded question because for me, I do think terpenes are important, but I also only think that they're a really small piece of the entire equation. And I think that I analyze a lot of terpenes, and we're really only looking at a couple dozen at best, and there's hundreds to really dive into. So I'll say this: whenever trying to consume a cannabis product, I'm rarely interested in the THC content. I'll tell you that. I mean, if
Why
you
is
have
that?
more, well, if you have more THC, then you have less other things, right? I mean, you can only have 100% of something. So
Right.
if you're smoking a 40% THC flower, which I sometimes don't even believe that that's possible per se, but
hmm
then where's the other percentage of compounds that are valuable too? Like if I want to get more high, I'll just smoke more of a joint. I'll just smoke more of a vape. I don't need to have the highest percentage. Many times when I'm taking a dab or I'm sampling some rosin, I'm really actually
You're cutting
going
out of me
towards
a
the
little
much.
bit there. Are you there? There you are.
I'm here.
Okay.
Um, like whenever I'm sampling, let's say a dab or some rosin, I'm actually going for a very low temp experience. I'm really trying to appreciate all of the volatile aromatic compounds rather than just getting blown out with THC because I personally have a lower tolerance than a lot of other industry people. Um,
And how
and
do you
I
look for a
actually
low temp? Is that on the packaging or how do you know that it's a low temp?
Well, like when I'm like so like dabbing and other devices to consume extracts allow you to control the
Okay.
temperature at which you consume the product. And so obviously if you're lighting up a joint, it's you're going to be getting what you're getting. But many of these compounds that are very valuable, which we're going to start talking about, can only be experienced at a low temp. Otherwise, they pyrolyze and they actually become rancid and not desirable.
So the cannabis plant is made up of many, many, many compounds. Can you touch quickly on some of the other ones that are also
Yeah.
playing a role?
So at a very high level, you have terpenes and cannabinoids, which from a mass percentage of a pie chart, they definitely make up the majority of all the compounds in there. But you also have ketones. These are sweet smelling compounds. You have esters. These are things like grape and butter and banana and fruits. You also have aldehydes. You have alcohols and you have terpenoids, right? Which are actually a slightly more water soluble version of terpenes that are rarely picked up, in analysis. And really, when we're looking at terpenes, we're only pulling about 40% to 50% of the actual terpenes that are available. Um, so that's kind of a high level overview of the botanical compounds. Then you obviously have different cannabinoids. So you have CBD, THC, the big ones. You have varin varieties, which is THCV, CBDV, and CBGV. You have CBG, which is the mother cannabinoid, where all the cannabinoids kind of synthesize downstream from. Um, and you have alkanes, you have other hydrocarbons. So there's really a complex mixture of different compounds that the cannabis plant creates. Many of those are more important in many ways than THC.
And we're learning more and more how complicated, or how complex, I should say, the cannabis plant really is, and how many compounds there are. But this isn't unique to cannabis. We've talked about the wine industry before, and in wine, they're not focused on the percentage of alcohol, right? As we've talked about this, it's more on the esters, it's more on the other elements that are in the wine, and what really make up that wine, and the aromas that you get from that, and the flavors that you get from that. And so really hoping that this industry will go more towards focusing on the bigger picture and all the elements that go into it, rather than just the THC level.
Yeah, I'd like to spend just a moment on that because, like every other industry where we're talking about quality and we're talking about desirability of choosing how you imbibe, when you go to the store or a winery and you're sitting down in a tasting room, they're not talking about the alcohol by volume, right? It's almost the least important conversation. When you go buy tequila, it's standardized to 40% alcohol. It's the last thing that you're looking for. You're trying to pick up on those smoky notes or those tannins or those, how it was aged in a barrel or not, maybe in a stainless steel vat. So like those are the things that people have learned to incorporate into their buying decisions when they're choosing a wine or a beer or a spirit. And I don't really see cannabis as really that much different. I mean, eventually, like with edibles, everything's 100 milligrams. And that's the world that I live in, right? It's a maximum of 100 milligrams THC. And so once you've capped that out, how else do you add value to these products? How else do you modulate these experiences? My ethos is always going back to trying to keep it as similar to the plant as it made it naturally. I believe that in lieu of a ton of years of science to come, if we just stay there, we're doing, most of it right. Maybe where we want to get to is removing certain compounds that might have, bitter notes or might have, off tastes or, smells that aren't desirable, like hoppy smells if you're not trying to go for that in a drink. That's really actually where we should be doing the work is saying let's leave it all intact and let's just remove out the stuff that we just don't want.
And people, I think, have just gotten so focused on getting gotten focused on getting higher. How high can I get? And so these higher THC levels, where they used to be at 10, 15%, 20%, even a couple years ago, are now in 30, 40% coming out. And really, it's not the amount of THC, but the total amount of cannabinoids, correct?
And any person who has any experience consuming cannabis or appreciating cannabis and has access to a variety of the best stuff out there will tell you that it's absolutely not the THC percentage that will do it. In some cases, I hear people saying that they'll get more high off of a, you know, 20% THC flower with a much higher terpene content than a 35% flower that's, been dragged through, the mud and has no terpenes left, was dried incorrectly, number of different things. You're not going to lose THC content by handling flower incorrectly as much as you're going to lose terpenes because they're much more volatile, right? Some of these terpenes
Hmm.
and esters and ketones, I mean, they're volatilizing, meaning they're boiling off at room temperature in many cases. And so if you're not
Interesting.
really storing these things correctly, you may still end up with a really high percentage of THC, but it's no indication that the flower is quality, that the product is still quality. And so I think it's really important to raise awareness for terpenes really are just a marker on the package for quality. If you've retained a lot of terpenes, there's a good chance that the flower was grown correctly, harvested correctly, dried correctly, and packaged correctly. And so that's also like a really good indication for folks looking for a quality experience to be mindful of.
Well, it's an interesting time. We're almost 4 years into legal regulation here in California, and it's still a bit of the wild, wild west. The regulations continue to keep changing, and the state has finally just created a standardized testing pathway for labs for testing cannabinoids. So moving forward, it'll be interesting to see what kind of levels of THC we actually see out there, because there are certain labs that we hear have been fudging the numbers maybe a little bit up into those super high numbers. So we'll see. It'll be nice to kind of see everything kind of being the same here in the future.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I have a very interesting perspective on that because I spend a lot of my time working with labs. I'd say I spend at least 3 hours a day sifting through lab tests and talking about prep methods and talking about extractions and recovery and calibration curves. And although people are fudging numbers on potency for flour, I think that's probably the most need for standardization for sure because it's really just confusing people. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Um, on the other
And
side
I'm
of
not saying
things,
they're lying about numbers. I'm just saying everyone has been testing differently,
well,
right? And so
and
maybe you can
analytical
do something.
chemistry has a lot of things that you can do to be able to mess with something. Like if you tilt the grinder the right way as it's being extracted, and all the keef piles up in one side, and you're recovering that, you're going to fudge, the number of THC molecules in there. So is that really stating that the flower is more potent? No, it's just a sleight of the hand that is technically legal, but it's like ethically incorrect. Now, where I think it blurs the lines is, infused products, we always are just trying to be at 100 milligrams, right, for maximum potency. Let's use that as an example. We don't want to be 200 milligrams, right, and we don't want to be 50 because then we'll have to relabel everything. So for us, it actually, the standardization works almost against us because every product from a suppository to a chocolate to a gummy does not prep the same. I mean, if you run a solvent over it, you're not going to get the same recovery with the same method on every single product. Like when we run our nano powders, it's very difficult for the lab to get a complete extraction and pull all the THC out of those powders because they're so well encapsulated by this other molecule where in a gummy that's not a problem. So standardization is needed. It's a much more complicated topic. I think it really applies almost exclusively to flour because
But
that's
it's
really where it's
but,
being abused.
but it's getting applied to edibles as well and
Unfortunately,
other.
it's like, one size fits nobody approach
Yeah.
some of the times with these things, but it's a very complex discussion, and I do think it'll do more good than harm, especially when it comes to consumer safety and awareness. But where I fear that it might fall short is actually not recovering enough cannabinoids out of complex matrices, and then consumers are actually getting twice the amount of cannabis that's able to be even be detected in some cases. And so that can be kind of scary. I think it's not a one size fits all, and we can talk more about it later, but I had to make a note on that.
Sounds good. Well, I know you consume. So what's your go-to?
Oh, that's a good question. It kind of depends. I'm not smoking averse. I'll light up a joint in a group of people. I see it as a way to socialize around a campfire when I'm outside, when I'm kind of doing stuff. When I'm inside with the baby and I'm kind of trying to sneak from task to task and I don't want to smoke something, I'll use a drink or a gummy. Um, Drink just feels like, I'm really bullish on the drink category because I believe it solves the form factor recognition of actually putting something to your mouth and replacing alcohol as a vice. And as we're all trying to drink less coming out of the pandemic, I just feel like that has really worked for me in terms of substituting an alcohol beverage for a cannabis beverage. So, and I'm constantly doing R&D and testing. So, really depends. I like it all. I
So
like it all.
okay, question of the day. How do you elevate daily?
How do I elevate? Well, I'll definitely go for a nice swim at the beach. That's like my favorite thing to do. Sometimes I'll take a little quick rip off a vape pen, or I'll take a chocolate or a drink additive and just kind of like combine that with my workout. I think that the two actually go really well together, and I think it'd be interesting to explore more about how people consume in their daily lives as opposed to just like before they go to bed or something.
Awesome. Where can we find you on social media?
You can find me at Splash Nano, or if you want to follow my personal one, you can request me at whois_KB, and yeah, I might let you in.
Well, Kalon, thank you so much. This was so wonderful. As always, I love our conversations and learning more from you. You are such a wise wonder of information, and I look forward to having you on more often.
Yeah, awesome. I'm excited to keep it going, and hopefully we'll just keep building.